What if the person you loved most was stolen from you, not by fate, not by choice, but by the one person you trusted the most, your own brother? This is a story of betrayal, disappearance, and a return years later with one goal: to dismantle every lie and reclaim what was taken. But in the end, she must face the hardest question of all. Will revenge heal her or destroy her? I remember the way he looked at me on that rainy evening, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and love. The downpour smudged the world into shades of gray and white, obscuring the happy town square beneath a veil of tears. We had met here just a year ago, two stubborn hearts insisting on a life together. Now, under stormy skies, he held me in his arms like he was saying goodbye. "The world is changing around us," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's not safe for either of us." Rain fell through the arches of the church entrance, and cold droplets drummed against the pavement. I tried to laugh it off, brushing her wet hair from my face. "Tell me you're kidding," I pleaded. But the tremble in his fingers around my waist gave the answer. He closed his eyes briefly, the weight of dread evident in his expression. "I love you. I always have," he managed, voice trembling. "But I'm gone, Mia. You knew from the day we met that my past might come back to haunt me. I can't fight it." Lightning flashed one last time across the sky, as if someone high up were giving me their blessing. In that flash, I burned the memory of his departing silhouette into my mind. He vanished into the storm, but I vowed to myself I would reappear in his life when all this nightmare was done. I recalled just 2 mornings before, the sun had spilled through our bedroom window as he held me close and whispered, "Only 1 week until I make you mine forever." His words were warm comfort then. Now they lie hollow on my tongue. He was supposed to read his vows tonight under that very stormy sky. Instead, he was leaving. The last thing I saw of him was that sudden surrender, his shoulders bowed, the flame in his eyes dimming as he turned away. A single white rose dropped from his hand and tumbled at my feet, its petals spreading like a silent explosion of all I had hoped for. For a moment, I thought it was a cruel joke. I followed a few steps, mouth open in a silent scream, expecting him to turn and laugh. But when he didn't, the cold truth burrowed into my gut. My knees gave way then, but I refused to let the grief wash me away. I clutched that drenched rose to my chest, as if it were the last connection to everything I had loved. The thunder growled overhead and the storm intensified, but I noticed nothing but him disappearing into the dark. My own voice cracked when I tried to call his name, so I dropped to the pavement, hugging my knees. The petals were already curling in on themselves. Their pure white stain turned muddy brown beneath the rain. In that final moment, I knew I would never be the same. Even as the world in that square blurred around me, I felt eerily calm. This was the end of something, and the beginning of something I didn't fully understand yet. Lightning and thunder raged, but inside my mind there was only silence. My world had shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. Lightning flashed across the sky, and I heard distant church bells toll midnight, our wedding bells, ringing just for me. Everyone else in the square had vanished. I was alone. I made a silent promise. I would make one of my own. Alejandro was gone, for reasons he gave or others I would someday uncover. But I would not vanish with him. I would fight back the dark in whatever way I could. Somehow, even if I had to give all of myself, I would bring him home to me. It was a promise whispered to the thunder. He wouldn't get away with what he'd done. Lightning stormed, but in the depths of that night a spark lit in my heart. The spark of vengeance, the spark of survival. Thunder rolled overhead, echoing the chaos pounding in my chest as I forced myself back to life. The next morning, the house was quiet. My father, who had driven me home hours earlier, said nothing as he stood in the doorway by the kitchen table. Concern was written on his lined face. I poured myself a cup of coffee to calm my trembling hands. When I answered his question, my voice was just above a whisper. "He's gone," I said flatly. My own heart started to crack again. He walked away. He said nothing. I could feel him standing close, his posture unreadable in the dull morning light. I pulled the rose petals from my forehead one by one and dropped them on the table. Each catch of my breath felt like shards of broken glass. This rose was my proof. That morning, I wore the same clothes he'd given me, the burgundy scarf and my winter coat. He had bought them thinking we'd walk home from church together. Now I stood outside alone, pulling my scarf tighter around my neck and shivering for reasons that had little to do with the cold. The first year after he left passed in a blur of empty days and haunted nights. Everywhere I turned, people whispered about my fiancé's sudden disappearance. The police took my report with polite detachment. Without a body or a statement from Alejandro himself, they said there wasn't much to do. Come back if he resurfaces, one detective sighed. My blood froze. A fairy tale ending, I thought bitterly. No happily ever after. But I would not drown. I would not let despair be my story. The weeks bled into months. I returned to our empty apartment and packed away our photos. Each picture showed laughing faces and hope, all of it now choking me with the weight of lies. I found myself standing in front of the bedroom mirror, staring at the girl who had believed in love, in tomorrow. She looked lost, her eyes hollow. It was then the pain in me shifted. I would not crumble, I would transform. Pain would be my fuel. Some nights, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, staring at our wedding invitation spread across the coffee table. Each floral letter I had once drawn was now smudged with my tears. I whispered to the silence, "Why did this have to happen?" But no answer came, only the ticking clock and memories. Every future moment he had promised, a cozy holiday by the lake, lazy summer afternoons under this very tree, had been snatched away. If those dreams gave me hope, they also became proof of what I was fighting for. By day, I threw myself into anything that felt tangible. I started running before dawn, each pounding step a challenge to the world that had just taken everything from me. I hit the gym at night, learning to feel my strength where once there had been weakness. My fists learned to punch through anger and frustration. Every bruise I earned was a reminder that I could survive this. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college, studying criminal justice and computer science. I wanted to understand the systems that had let this happen, to become fluent in anything that might help me track him down. I spent nights dissecting law textbooks and searching case files online, as if the answers to all our secrets were hidden in hardcovers and archives. No mercy was given to me by time, but each day I became a new person. I had learned a painful truth. Love given freely could be stolen, but a heart steeled by truth could never truly break. By the time dawn broke the next day, I had already packed essentials and caught a flight out of the country. In London, I buried Maria behind a wall of new habits. Each morning in a chilly park, I ran until my legs burned, repeating Javier's name as a mantra. Every evening I pored over law tomes or fixed up a shortwave radio, scanning channels for mentions of Alejandro Reyes. I learned to be sharper than the blade I carried in my boot. In the European winter, I took up martial arts classes at a silent gym. Krav Maga 1 month, Muay Thai the next. The sensei taught me to fight even when blood blinded me. I realized he didn't know the reason for my ferocity. My muscles hardened along with my resolve. On one Prague rooftop at sunrise, I punched through a sheet of plywood hung as a target, splintering it into the icy air. I let out a scream, channeling 4 years of grief into that one sound that none could hear. By the time I finished, the air was still. I had built myself up piece by piece, brick by brick, hoping there would be nothing left of me that could break. During the day, I donned the glasses and lanyard of a law intern, Portfolio Herrera. In law libraries, by morning I studied codes and precedent. In the afternoons, I flew to a new country for seminars. Spanish in Madrid, French in Paris, and even a hacking workshop in Berlin. Each certificate I earned felt like a step forward, evidence that I was preparing for something. In Madrid, I practiced Spanish slang until my accent could fool any ear. In Berlin, I hacked encryption puzzles until my fingers knew every trick. My nights became split in two, an obedient law student by day, a lonely vigilante sharpening her skills by night. Money flowed from hidden accounts, the kind my brother had pretended to set aside for tuition. In truth, he unknowingly financed my transformation. The trust fund I had once glanced at now funded Mia, my new identity. I transferred it through offshore shells and anonymous trusts until there was no trace back. My old life savings became fuel for survival, and every transaction was another lie I erased to protect the truth I sought. All the while, I scribbled plans in a battered notebook. When moments of solitude hit, I'd thumb through our old pictures, us at the lake, laughing as the sunset caught your hair. Sometimes I dared to call out your name as I ran at midnight on foreign streets. But there was no answer except my echo. I clenched my fists and willed my tears to become strength. In those darkest nights, I imagined our future conversations, wondering how I would explain to you what I did and why. I wrote letters to you I would never send, begging for forgiveness I did not yet know you deserved. Then I burned the pages, as if watching my doubts turn to ash. Days blurred into each other as I went through routines. Some nights I lay awake on the couch, staring at my wedding dress rolled up in its garment bag. It had been months since I pretended to myself that I was going to anything resembling home. All the lessons I learned I filed away like evidence. The technique of a perfect uppercut, the pattern of a network protocol, and the best angles for reading a suspect's microexpressions. When I lost focus or strength, I reminded myself that I was not the naive girl who cried in the rain that night. I was now her protector. 5 years passed in a blur of identity changes and rising skill. Maria Herrera had grown from a frightened girl into a hunter. Yet in all that time, I never forgot what I had sacrificed. I was living for a day that had not come, the day I would find him again. By 29, I was ready. My law degree was in hand, intelligence sharper than ever. I bought a one-way ticket home under the name Mia Reyes. The new me, poised, powerful, stepped off the plane into the gray dawn and into a world that had kept turning. No one in our hometown recognized this version of me. They saw a stranger returning from abroad to reclaim her future, and that assumption granted me all the cover I needed. I told the airline I was visiting family. I told the rental agent I was a young lawyer coming back from Europe. The lies about Maria's identity had become easier to slip into. In public, I was just another face in the crowd. In private, I was every bit the person I needed to be to succeed. Graduation day arrived in late spring sunlight. The campus court was alive with joy. My parents beamed as I walked across the stage to accept my diploma. I waved to Alejandro in the crowd of family. We had insisted on attending each other's ceremonies no matter how busy life got. Now I took one final bow, unsure if I'd still walk off with him by my side. That evening, I packed my suitcase while Alejandro helpfully asked questions about my destination, to London for an internship. What I didn't say was that I was running the other way. He came in the door a few minutes later, holding groceries. Our parents chatted, proud. Alejandro hugged me and said quietly, "I'm proud of you, Mia. You're going to do great things." I kissed his cheek. It hurt to lie. I let him believe I was just an ambitious girl going far. But as he turned away, I typed a final note card for my own memory. He stands in our kitchen, bag slung, smiling. Does he know this will be the last time he sees me for years? The next morning, I slipped away before dawn. A taxi waited, and when I caught sight of the airport sign through the windshield, a thrill shot through me, but also pain. The adrenaline couldn't mask it forever. Alejandro kissed my forehead at our doorstep and whispered, "This is just the beginning." I didn't respond. What was there to say? With a single nervous glance back at the door of my childhood home, I disappeared. Before dawn, I packed one final item, an old photograph of Javier and me, frozen in a summer smile, curling its edges to remove the future we imagined. I also wrote a letter for him that I never mailed. The words came easy on the page, my love, my despair. But as the train to the airport rattled on the horizon, I realized I didn't want him wondering. I crumpled the note and let it burn in a candle flame. The taxi ride to the terminal was silent except for the hum of traffic. In the rearview mirror, I saw my parents' faces pressed against the glass, tears on my mother's cheek, and confusion on my father's. Alejandro stood by the driveway, unmoving. I offered a tight smile and whispered, "All right, promise." But even as I said it, I knew distance would weave more lies. At Heathrow, I changed out of the suit she'd worn under her coat into travel-worn jeans and a black jacket. I stepped through the sliding glass doors as Maria Herrera, the visiting law student. A British woman complimented my English. I lied effortlessly about it. In that mirror, I saw a stranger's eyes, hard and determined. This was the only goodbye I'd allow myself to Javier and to home. In Amsterdam, the countryside flashed by the train window, and I kept my face hidden. No one came looking for me. I told the consulate I had lost track of the letter from home, even though I had sealed it myself. My disappearance became just another tale. She chose independence. My parents later told me they were assured I was safe with relatives abroad. That was enough. In truth, I was fleeing the ashes our lives had become. I was suffocating under secrets, and I had chosen air. For 5 years, Maria was my only identity. I moved constantly, sometimes giving the name of a friend's daughter, sometimes inventing relatives, so no one message reached the wrong ears. One last thing. 2 months after I left, a photograph surfaced in the hometown paper showing Javier smiling awkwardly with another woman. My throat closed. A part of me still hoped he had convinced her to love him. I ignored the ache and buried it. None of this reached me. Sometimes at night, I'd scan the news and case files for a clue. A few random crimes and corporate scandals floated by, none connected. Alejandro's name never surfaced. For a long time, it felt like he vanished too, leaving only me adrift in silence. However, the world I was hiding from was crumbling on the inside. Enemies Alejandro had made started slipping through my radar. First, it was a mid-level bureaucrat under investigation, then whispers of a hidden corporate scandal involving my uncle's company. I realized Alejandro's manipulation had layers I had yet to unearth. Then came a tip, a newswire article buried in footnotes. Alejandro's old partner had fled overseas after a fiery trial. I saved it, knowing it was a start. One morning in a crowded cafe, I recognized a familiar suit in a grainy photo on a tablet left behind by a nervous businessman. It was an associate from Alejandro's empire. I memorized every detail. Without warning, I packed again, not for escape, but to pursue. I booked flights to the cities where my memories lurked, finally ready to confront them. I remember the day I came back as though it were a quiet sunrise. I stood outside Alejandro's new office building, letting early light warm my face. The city stirred behind me. Nothing looked the same, yet every step felt loaded with history. I held my breath and walked in, claiming to return to the firm for a legal consulting assignment. The lobby hummed with morning activity. People glanced at my briefcase, not at the foreign confidence in my stride. Inside the waiting area, I watched Alejandro meet with a dignitary, Gabriel Moreno, the same bureaucrat from home now installing Alejandro as one of his trusted advisors. I noted the handshake and the smile. They didn't see me. I had transformed into someone they no longer recognized. Yet I had sharpened myself for this moment. I had one goal in mind, to infiltrate Alejandro's world. Since returning, I had already made contacts in his network, posing as an associate sent to review paperwork. Each piece of evidence I gathered now had an explanation in the cover story I'd created. The first day back, I quietly took up a position in his old office wing. Pretending to be a junior consultant, I shadowed Alejandro's routines and scanned every open computer I could access. By lunchtime, I had already marked the briefcases of at least 2 men who reported directly to him. I suspected they carried results, not lunch. As I circled the corner office to watch, something caught my eye through frosted glass. The nameplate A. Reyes on a door. The image froze me momentarily. It was still the same brass plate he had when we first fell in love. Now it was being handed off to him like a sinister trophy. I waited until Alejandro stepped away for a meeting and slipped inside. His private office was exactly how I remembered it, down to our framed photo on the corner of his desk, though now another woman stood by his side. A gold envelope lay open on the desk, resting partially behind our picture. Curious, I carefully slid the letter out. My own handwriting sprawled across it. "Promise me you'll come back." With trembling fingers, I read what I thought I had burned. He had rewritten my plea into a trap. I felt bile rise, but I forced myself to be calm. I had expected this. In the envelope, I discovered more than my letter. There were documents I'd photocopied in a London law library, marriage certificates, including one signed by Gabriel Moreno with Javier's name circled. The greatest lie had been documented in ink. Everything fit. Javier had not left by choice. They had married him off. My jaw tightened. I stuffed the letter back, but slipped the documents into my purse. As I silently closed the door, a familiar voice behind me said, "Everything all right here?" It was Camila, the young associate I had met in London when she'd come to visit Raphael. She had recognized me as Mia and discreetly agreed to watch out for me. I nodded, feigning focus on an email. That night, in the safe darkness of a motel room, I laid out what I had: snippets of Alejandro's journal entries, the marriage contract, and photographs. Piece by piece, every lie he'd told Javier became an undeniable fact. I realized I had underestimated how far he'd go. Yet my fury was steady now. I would draw him out, pull every false pawn back to the board, and end this game once and for all. No one was untouchable. Every path I took around Alejandro felt blocked by his reach. I needed to get closer to Javier, to see the man I loved, and perhaps catch a hint of who he had become. But the threads Alejandro had woven were tight. I was still a stranger in his world, and approaching Javier directly could blow everything. So I stayed hidden, gathering proof instead. One rainy afternoon, I sat at the cafe by the docks, the one he used to call our hideaway. I watched Alejandro through the window, poring over paperwork. In his hand was a phone. I recognized the gold chain around his wrist as ours. Every detail solidified the new life they'd forced him into. A whisper of pity passed me as I realized he still wore the golden chain I'd given him years ago, the same one he wore that night of our engagement. Later, as I lingered at a train station to tail Alejandro to a suburban estate, my phone buzzed. It was him. My heart lurched. He was real, alive, and he wanted to talk. We met at the cafe where I had discovered he still loved coffee. He arrived first, sitting alone at our old table, hands wrapped around a mug of steaming milk. When I slid into the seat across, he flinched, not at my presence, but at the notebook in my hand. I had copies of Alejandro's journal and the contract. From the contract, I had juggled to expose everything. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he whispered finally. His cheeks were too thin, his eyes haunted. He seemed to shrink in the chair, suddenly very small. I studied him, the same eyes, but exhaustion had claimed his face. "I came for you," I said softly. He looked confused. "If only I'd known," he said, voice cracking. "I thought I'd never forgive you. I thought I'd moved on until they told me what he did." His voice caught. This was exactly what I needed him to say. "I'm sorry," I said, aching and tired. "I should have come looking for you, Javier." He reached across and grasped my hand, still wrapped with the notebook. The cafe lights reflected in our teary eyes. "You need to find me on your own," he whispered, pressing his palm against mine. "You've done enough." We held each other's gaze. Outside, the storm had finally ended. In that quiet reunion, no more words were needed. Camila dialed 911 from the alley. I watched Alejandro stride back to his office building, unaware, still smug. He muttered into the phone, "She's the fiancée? I have a lot to say." Then he hung up. He looked around, noticing us hidden behind a dumpster. He opened his mouth to speak, but police sirens were closing in. Suddenly, my cover was blown. I stepped out into the dim light of a corridor, confronting him across the glint of mirrors and suits. He was chained by his own arrogance. "Evening, Alejandro," I said, voice steady, though my pulse hammered. "It's over now." Confusion flickered on his face. He noticed police flooding the hall behind me, and anger bloomed. "You," he spat throat tight. "You got me arrested?" The smugness drained away. Surrounded, he straightened, trying to maintain dignity. "I don't know what you think you did," he stammered as an officer ordered him to turn around and raise his hands. Camila stepped in, flashing her badge. "Alejandro Reyes, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and kidnapping," she said clearly. He suddenly looked small, broken, and truly powerless. Kneeling beside the flickering cops, papers I'd planted fluttered from Alejandro's briefcase onto the carpet, scandal after scandal, all prime evidence we had unearthed. Outside, my friends and new colleagues approached as backup. We gave statements, the contracts, the daycare records, and the recordings. It was finally over. In that moment, justice wasn't just revenge, it was truth set free. Alejandro's empire crumbled that night, and the next morning's headlines screamed it. There, in bold letters, was the family name we once wore with pride, now associated with corrupt deals and deceit. I watched the sun rise through the cracked window of the police station's break room, the sky painted in quiet pastels after the storm. Days later, word came that he would face charges, not just for fabricating Javier's disappearance, but for a host of other crimes. News cameras caught glimpses of him in cuffs. He still held arrogance in his posture, but his eyes darted to the crowd. A flicker of triumph warmed me when I saw a whisper of my name among the murmurs, Mia. We met at the cafe again months after the arrest. It was quiet now, and the baristas didn't recognize our story from the headlines. He arrived first, sitting alone. I slid in opposite, our notebook between us. When I handed him Alejandro's journal and the proof of everything, his eyes brimmed with confusion and anger. "Yes, it was all true," I answered, the tears in his eyes. My knees nearly buckled with the old pain. "I'm sorry," he said into my hair. "I should have come looking for you." "You needed to find me on your own," I whispered back, voice steady. He pulled away to look at me, hands still clasping mine. I smiled sadly, letting the sunlight from the cafe window fall on us. "We begin again," I replied. I meant it, even as I knew we'd never be the same. We were older, stronger, and broken both, but not defeated. We had each other and truth on our side. He pressed a kiss to my forehead, the gesture simple and real. In that moment, everything felt true again. The storm had passed, and we stepped into its calm together. I stood outside Alejandro's prison on a quiet afternoon, watching guards bring him to his cell. A family man in shame stepped out, now truly alone. I held Javier's hand as he squeezed mine. Justice had been served, not in perfect vengeance, but in the peace we finally found. Each scar on my body and every line on my face reminded me of the journey. They were medals of survival. I had been shattered and then forged anew. Looking back, I no longer wasted time asking, why me? Instead, I chose to be grateful for the clarity the ordeal brought. The lies that had nearly consumed us had crumbled, and what remained was real. If Alejandro's betrayal was poison, the truth we uncovered was its antidote. I learned that vengeance itself was never the goal. It was the life I regained and the peace I finally felt. Sometimes, the greatest victory of all is simply choosing to live fully once more. For us, each morning felt like a second chance at life, and I felt truly like the luckiest person indeed. This simple choice was the true victory of all. And with that truth in my heart, I faced the future without fear. For us, each morning felt like a second chance, and I felt like the luckiest person, truly. And I was finally free to live again. Months later, I found myself back at our old kitchen table, not across from him pleading, but beside him, sharing stories like before. Alejandro was safely behind glass, forced to reckon with the web he had spun. Our family's lies lay in ruins. I would never romanticize the past, nor pretend everything had returned to how it was. The cost had been high. I had lost who I once was to regain the truth. But I held on to a lesson hard-earned. Truth is liberating, even if it comes wrapped in pain. I had sacrificed everything, my old life, my identity, and my peace, for this fight. But in the end, I chose compassion over hate. I learned that family can betray you, but honesty can set you free. Justice wasn't only about prison bars. It was the truth finally being spoken. And as the sun set each evening, painting the sky with warm hues of promise, I realized that finding peace with the truth was the greatest triumph of all. Standing now in sunlight, I remember that rainy night and marvel at how far I've come. I couldn't have imagined then, crouched on that curb with a single rose, that I'd be here, stronger, free, and reunited with the soul I thought I lost. We may not have the wedding we once planned, but we have each other and a life ahead. I have learned that even the deepest wounds can heal when the truth is in place. For the town story, it became one of healing, of two people who faced down betrayal and found light again. If anyone remembers one thing from this tale, let it be that love and truth are stronger than deceit. Lies can haunt you, but when they crumble, what remains is real. So I wake up each day not with vengeance in my heart, but with gratitude and purpose. The storm is over. Now it's time to live. For me, waking up with the truth was the true victory. As I stood there, watching my brother finally face the weight of his betrayal, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about taking back what was stolen. It was about exposing the truth and freeing myself from the chains of lies. My fiancé finally knew the real story, but I also knew that no matter what, I could never return to the girl I once was. I had become someone stronger, someone unafraid to confront the darkest secrets of her own blood. Justice was served, not by destroying him, but by revealing him. And in that moment I understood, sometimes victory is not about reclaiming the past, it's about reclaiming yourself. If you enjoy Famigraphic Show stories, don't forget to like us and subscribe to our channel. Let us know your comment in the comment section. If you were in my shoes, would you choose to take back the love you lost or walk away forever after exposing the truth?